Well, welcome back, everybody. We still have a few minutes until 3 o'clock, so we'll give everybody else an opportunity to keep coming in. We thought we'd start off by sharing a photo of some of the bread baking that we were doing while you were letting your bread dough proof. The photo that you're seeing here is of the buns and the bagels on the right side of the picture. It's the just after the proofing was done and they were rising up. And on the left, it's the two of those things all done after they were done baking. So they turned out beautifully. As you can see, they proofed perfectly. The bagels were nice and firm. Just for the point of reference, but all of that's the same dough that you made for your bread. With just some minor tweaks, you can turn them into different products. And so that's what we got. The bagels, the only thing different about the bagels is you have to scoop them off the thing and boil them in water for about 40 seconds on each, or 20 seconds on each side, a total of 40 seconds. Then you scoop them out of the boiling water, let them dry on a rack, and then bake them. Both the bagels and the buns bake at 450 degrees for 20 minutes.
Yep.
And voila, beautiful, beautiful bagels and buns.
And we taste tested them. They came out okay.
When we bake, we have to eat. We have no choice. we have zero impulse control at this house.
The smell just was too much, so we had to eat one.
So anyway, I'm going to turn off the picture so you can see nice and big the actual bagels and buns. Check that out for just that little bit of baking. That's just a huge pile of bagels and buns, and they are absolutely delightful. To give you a sense of the size and scope of those bagels, I mean, check out that bagel. I mean, that is a bagel. I mean, oh my gosh. And they've got, because of the boiling, they get this nice crunchy exterior, and the buns are so light and fluffy, you would hardly believe it. So anyway, so that's a sampling of what you can do with sourdough once you get the hang of the bread. I think in some ways, the sourdough rounds that you're making are some of the hardest to do. So once you've got the sourdough round mastered.
This is the gay couple.
Yes, it is. It is the gay couple. We're going to get started here really, really soon. And I think we've got just one more minute before everybody else comes. But hopefully your bread doughs have been rising. Hopefully your proofing is all set. The last phase here, what we're going to do is get our dough ready to get it into the oven. And hopefully your oven should be at about 500 degrees now. If you're using a Dutch oven, your Dutch oven should be in the oven getting hot with your oven, so it's all hot. And this last phase is really one of the most delicate and important parts of the sourdough making process. Because at this point, the dough can get very, very delicate. And the more you handle it, the more air will come out of it, and the potential you have for the dough to just flatten and deflate. And so one of the reasons we have advocated for the cookie sheet approach we're going to show you instead of the Dutch oven approach is you end up having to handle the dough a lot more if you're going to cook it in the Dutch oven. So before we do our actual baking and set it up, I'm going to explain what the process will be for those of you who are going to try to do the Dutch oven. So we're going to get our dough out, we're going to lay it out, we're going to prepare the surface of the dough for baking, and we're going to look at two different options, scoring and washing. Those are two different approaches to preparing it for the oven. Then if you're going to put it into the Dutch oven, you've got to take your hot Dutch oven out of the oven, and you've got to gently lift that delicate hunk of dough and plop it down into the scalding hot Dutch oven.
Or gently place it.
Yeah, you don't want to plop it down in there, or it's going to deflate. You're going to have a very sad looking hunk of dough in there. And you have to try to do that without burning yourself on the scalding hot Dutch oven. And you have to do that extra handling. If you're doing the flat cookie sheet approach, we're literally just going to roll the dough out onto the cookie sheet. We're going to wash it and score it right on this, and then we're going to put this in the oven. So we have very little handling of the dough to do. So we have less deflating to happen, and it's all really good. The only real benefit the Dutch oven gives you is that humidity control. But remember, we've accounted for that by adding a pan of water into the oven that's adding moisture and humidity to the inside of the oven. So anyway, that's the difference. If you're doing the Dutch oven, try not to burn yourself, but that's what you're going to do while we're getting our bread into the oven.
Can I ask a question?
You bet.
Is parchment a good way to get it into the Dutch oven?
You can do
Yep.
that. And the parchment can also help keep it from sticking inside.
Yep.
You
Okay.
still, no matter how you cut it, you're dealing with a scalding hot, oftentimes cast iron device. And you're trying to handle this delicate piece of dough and get it down in there no matter what. That's what you're stuck having to do.
Right.
Yeah, but the parchment can make it a little bit less challenging. I think that's definitely a good idea.
Because then you roll it on the parchment and you can pick
Yep.
up the parchment and like slowly lower it.
Yeah, almost
Okay.
like it's a sling.
Yeah,
down in there.
So, but before we get our dough out, I'll let you know our dough rose very quickly, proofed very quickly. So we ended up having to put ours in the refrigerator. I'm curious to know, is there anybody whose dough didn't do much rising at all? It really kind of looks like what you started, or did everybody get pretty good rises? All right.
Tell us how, question, what would a good rise be? A double in size or a third?
You wanted, just some extra large. It should have gotten bigger. How much bigger is going to depend on which flour you use. Again, as we were talking about in the last segment, in New Mexico, because of the flour that we used was different than what we're used to, our bread rose almost nothing at all. And then when we put it in the oven, it got huge. You just want to make sure you saw it get bigger, and so that there's air and puffiness coming in. There should be some pillowing of it.
Yeah, if you're using a proofing basket like this, it should come over not over the rim, like down the sides, but at least pillow up above, like a little dome on top of the proofing basket, if that gives you a little bit of a guide.
I'll get
say that mine.
In a second, I'll get ours out. Ours just got huge. It's gigantic. And so I'm a little afraid that it may have overproofed, and when I roll it out, it's going to sag and get really sad looking. But before we even get our dough out, we have to decide some things about how we're going to prepare the bread. When you bake sourdough bread, it's going to rise up hopefully a lot. And one of the ways you're going to get the maximum amount of rise is by preventing the crust from forming too early. And and the way that you do that is by putting a liquid kind of wash over top of the dough to make it kind of wet. That's one approach. Another approach is to say, okay, the crust is going to form, but we're going to give it room to expand by slicing into the outer part, the drier part because when we roll it over, there's going to be all this flour on the underside from the proofing basket. That's going to be dry, and that's where the crust is going to form. You can slice into that to create weaknesses in the crust so that it will rise up and split open and kind of bloom. Most of you have probably seen these beautiful pictures of bakers who score these beautiful patterns into the crust. They do that to allow the dough, the moist dough inside, to rise up so that the crust doesn't harden and keep it from rising. So whether you do the egg wash or the scoring, that's all about making sure the dough has room and the ability to rise up and bloom in the oven. So you get to decide, do you want to put an egg wash on it or do you want to score it? I'm kind of a weirdo, you may have figured out. We are the gay couple. So we're going to do both. We're going to egg wash our loaf, and we're also going to score it so you can get a sense of which you want to do. If you're going to score it, you're going to want a super sharp knife. There are special utensils or tools they make for scoring bread. They're usually just a handheld device that uses a razor blade. You want something that's really ultra sharp, that's going to slice that top surface of the bread. So we're going to have that ready. I'm also going to make my egg wash, and for that, I'm simply going to take an egg and I'm going to crack it into a little dish. And for me, as I said, we love our garlic. And so I'm just we're going to peel a couple of cloves of garlic.
There's no such thing as too much garlic in our house.
Absolutely. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to roll the bread out onto the surface where we're going to cook it. And we're going to take a pastry brush. We're going to wash the surface of that with this garlic and egg. And then I'm going to sprinkle extra flour on it. If you're not going to score it, you don't have to sprinkle the flour on it. If you're just going to do the egg wash, you just wash it and stick it in the oven. But since we're going to be scoring too, I'm going to sprinkle flour on. And I just can't wait to show you our dough. It's pretty remarkable. So we're putting 2 large cloves of garlic in our egg wash because we really like our garlic.
Yes, we do. We've never had a vampire visit us yet.
And you really kind of want to have all of this done and ready to move as quickly as possible. So you might want to watch this and then do your own, because as soon as you roll the dough out and it's not in the proofing basket, it's going to start losing its shape and trying to flatten out. And so the rest of this process you're going to want to do as quickly as possible. So so I'm going to just do mine, and then we'll help you walk through doing yours. Now,
Yep, if you haven't washed your hands yet, this is a good chance to do that before you bring your dough out.
So this is what happened to ours. If you remember, this dough was way down below the lid of this basket, and this is all the rise that it's done. And it was rising so fast, we had to put it in the refrigerator. And if you'll notice, if I do the poke test, it's still bouncing back. So it probably has not gone too far, but it's right at the edge. So we're going to do this very, very carefully. At the least handling, the better, and the most gentle handling, the better. So you're just going to very carefully roll this over and take the basket off. Oh, look at that. Beautiful, lovely. I like to simply take my hands, my clean hands, and tuck the edges under just a little bit. That'll help it keep the round shape that you want to see. And we're going to just take a pastry brush. Take a pastry brush and get as much of the garlic and fun stuff out of the egg wash. And we're just going to wash it around on the surface of that bread. And we're coating. You can see the rosemary that we put in the basket is all on there, and it's going to be a beautiful loaf of bread. Oh, look at that.
Lots of garlic. Okay. And
then I'm going to just take this leftover egg and garlic, and I save that and I use it for making egg sandwiches in the morning. It's lovely. Don't ever throw anything away. There's no point to it. And then if you're going to score, the most important part of scoring, and it doesn't matter, there's all kinds of patterns online. You can simply put a slice down the middle. Some people do X's, some people do stars. I just like to do a little bit of a leaf pattern. So I do one deep slice down there, and I do like 3 little gentle slices on the side. And that you can see is just slicing into the dough, and it's going to give those places an opportunity to open up as it bakes. And I want them to be just slightly deeper, and then that can go away.
Don't have to go very deep into the bread at all.
And it will start to flatten. You can see it's started to flatten a little bit, and then I'm just going to take this and stick it into my 500-degree oven for baking. And so that's your project now. Decide if you're going to score, wash, or both, and get your bread into your 500-degree oven. And then you're going to set the timer for 20 minutes, 500 degrees for 20 minutes.
If you're doing the Dutch oven, you want the lid on to start. By the way, if any of you folks are doing roll buns, you don't want to put those in at the same time because those are going to go at 450, and you will be able to, if you have room in your oven, add those in a little bit.
Yeah, because we're going to bake the bread at 500 for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to turn the oven temperature down to 450. And then that would be a time where you can put your buns or your bagels or whatever, if you're doing that at the same time. Then you can put them together on different shelves.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so, oh, I guess you can see
Yeah.
My dough did not rise very much. I'm having trouble showing you, but.
I can see, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it did rise some, and
That's
it's
good.
a little, but my rolls, they didn't rise at all, really.
Okay.
I mean, they got bigger and flatter.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's that's what I would expect.
You've got
that can, you know, that's a result.
You've got a couple of choices. You can either continue proofing them longer and see if they rise more, or you can bake them, because again, as we said, when we were baking in New Mexico, because of the flour we were using, it got almost no rise at all. But then when it got into the oven, it rose dramatically.
Yep.
And so we can't tell you what your flour is going to do because we don't know what flour you're using or any of the other factors involved. So you can either bake it now and see what happens, or you can, you know, let it proof longer and see if you get more rise first.
Mm-hmm. Your rolls will wait
well,
anyway, because your rolls will have to wait the 20 minutes with the bread.
Right. And actually, I had the little pictures at the bottom, so I couldn't see the maneuver you did to get your dough out of your proofing basket onto the.
Gotcha.
Do you roll it with cloth?
Yeah, if this is a mimic, you have your tray. You put your one hand over it, and you just literally turn it and gently
roll it
out onto the. You don't want to drop it, so you want the bowl to be on the tray as you're leading it over.
And just slowly roll it out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, here goes nothing.
Good luck. Good luck. You know, if you've overproofed it, you'll know, because it just kind of goes,
Yeah. If it had a sound effect, that's what
But
it would
it's
make.
still, but no matter what, it's always worth cooking. It's always
Yeah.
worth trying and cooking it. So
Well, and we've had some of those deflated that have gone, and you know, we have used them for French toast. They make great for that. You know, there are things you can do with it. It still tastes delicious, and there still is nothing like a slice of it, you know, hot out of the oven. It doesn't matter how it turns out. It still tastes delicious in my mind.
Well, I think it's okay. I'm gonna
Looks
tuck it
it
up.
looks good.
Yeah.
Joan has a question, it sounds like.
I have a question. I used a colander because that's what I had, and I
Yeah.
discovered that it was actually kind of wide. So I have this really wide, flat shaped loaf. So will I just get a lot of crust and not a lot of inside, or how does?
Very likely, it may also puff up. I mean, that it's, again, it's a little bit like putting a piece of ceramic in, you know, a kiln. You never know for sure what's going to happen. It's going to depend on how much tension is on the outer sides, how much moisture is up at the top. If you slice the top, it may tend to rise up more. So if you score the top, that will encourage it to rise up more. So the shape that you're going to end up with could be very different. I've put some really flat looking breads in the oven and had them come out really tall. So you just never know for sure. You'll also, you know, one of the other reasons you want to score, because if you don't, all of the pressure that builds up inside that ball of dough is going to try to come out one way or another. And if you don't score it or don't egg wash it, you'll end up with these weird, like, bubbles that bulge out to the side. You know, these really like odd looking bread loaves, because that pressure is going to want to go somewhere, and it's going to go wherever you put that scoring. So you can encourage it to go wherever you want by where you score it.
Yeah.
So it seems like most, how's everybody doing on getting their bread in the oven? Very good.
So
If you got it.
if we're using a Dutch oven, do we put the cover on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So we'd be setting the timer?
Yep, and you have 20 minutes. So if you're using a Dutch oven, it's going to go 20 minutes at 500. Then after the 20 minutes, you're going to reduce the temperature to 450 degrees. And we're all going to do that. So after 20 minutes, we're all going to reduce the temperature to 450 degrees.
We're all going to set our timer for 10 minutes after that.
Yep. And then after that, if you have a Dutch oven, you're going to remove the cover after 10 minutes. And all of us are going to bake our bread for about a full hour. So we're not going to stay online while all the baking happens, because we'll be here for an hour. But you're going to get your bread in the oven and you're going to do all that stuff. But before we go, we'll stay for any other questions. I just want to say a handful of things about sourdough, and one of the reasons that we are big fans of it. One of the reasons we like to share it with you all. You know, we told you that the way we're growing wheat right now in the world is extremely toxic. It's toxic to the environment. It's, you know, toxic to us. It's why so many people can't eat bread products. This kind of takes us back to the olden days, the way bread is supposed to be made. So it's much healthier for the earth. It's much better for our bodies. And, you know, and we believe in, particularly times like this, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic and things, we're hoping that this is a time for people to stop and think about all of the things that we've been doing to the planet, that we're getting pushback from the planet about. The pandemic is part of that. And if we don't change the way we eat and live on the planet, you know, we're not going to be here a whole lot longer. So we're really encouraging people to take the sourdough to heart. If this first one doesn't turn out perfectly for you, don't give up. You can follow us on Facebook. You can go to our website, oururbanfarms.com. You can ask us questions after the fact. I guarantee you, you will only get better with each iteration of this.
Yep.
So it will get better. We want you all to come back at about 4 o'clock or a little after 4 o'clock, probably like 4:10, 4:20, after your bread is out of the oven, because we want to see the end result.
Yeah.
And we'll show you our end result and see how, well, then we can problem solve and troubleshoot if there's any pancakes that come out of the oven. We'll see if we can figure out, what happened and what you can do, at that point. But stay in contact with us. Share this idea. It's part of a whole litany of things that we're doing to change the way that we eat so that we can be on the planet in a healthier way.
Yeah,
Can you I have a question.
Yeah,
Can you review the timing again? So I have a Dutch oven. So
absolutely.
I'm doing 20 minutes with the lid on at 500, and then I reduce it to 450. Is that 10 minutes with the lid on and then another 10 with the lid off?
No, it's going to be 20 minutes at 500 with the lid on. Then it's going to be 450 for 10 minutes with the lid on. And then it's probably going to go for another 20 to 25 minutes. So you're pushing in total, you want to push it close to an hour. What's going to happen is, as the lid is on, it's going to form the basis of the shape of the bread. With the lid off, that's where you're going to get the browning effect, the crust effect. It comes after.
So that last 20 or 25 minutes is lid off?
Yeah,
correct.
So in total, it's going to be about an hour. And we're not going to give you the exact time because it's going to be different based on your oven. And different people like a different crust. Many of the hardcore sourdough addicts that are out there really love a dark crust. So they'll want their bread to go to where the darkest chunks are almost ready to start to turn black, not burnt, but just start to turn black. Some people like a lighter crust than that. So you're gonna, in this first 20, 25 minutes, no matter how tempted you are, do not peek. Anytime you open the oven or lift the Dutch oven, you're letting moisture out and you're gonna reduce the rise of your bread. So no matter what you do, just leave it for that first 20 minutes. After you've taken the lid off, you can peek at it periodically and pull it out when the crust looks good for you, when it's the crust that you like. Again, it's not a prescriptive thing. Everybody likes a different kind of crust, and the crust is one of the important parts, especially for those of us who put the garlic egg wash on. You can sometimes get those garlic chunks on top will start to turn just a really dark black, and that's when they're just really delightfully beautiful. So follow that plan, and then we'll meet back here at about 4:15, and our breads should all be done. But we'll stay here if you have any other questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this was a bucket list item for me years ago, and that's what kind of stirred us to do this. We watched that Michael Pollan video that had to do with bread making, and it reminded me of making banana bread, where you take something that's like rotten, like a rotten banana or a rotten looking banana, a black banana, but you turn it into something else that's delicious. And so there's something, in my mind, sort of magical about the process of taking 3 simple ingredients plus the spices if you added them, but 3 simple ingredients and actually turning it into something that's really, really healthy and nutritious and delicious. So that to me is the magic of it all.
It is, and it is magic, but it's one of many things. If you go to oururbanfarms.com, our website, you'll see that we're also growing as much of our own food as we can on our tiny little postage stamp of a yard. And we're just encouraging people to think about how they eat, because the way that we eat has a dramatic impact on the earth and the planet that we need to live on. And so as we all change our eating habits and begin making and growing our own food, we have a dramatically reduced footprint on the planet.
Yep.
So, and all that information is on our website. We encourage you. We want to see you back here right after 4:10, 4:15 to see your breads, but be sure to not lose touch with us by checking us out online.
So I have one more question.
Okay.
One more question.
Yep.
I know we want to show you what it looks like when we take it out of the oven, but theoretically, how long do you have to let it sit on the counter before you can slice it?
Oh boy, that depends on your willpower.
I have lots of people in the house waiting.
I would say it's going to be very, very hot for at least like, I don't know, 20 minutes.
Yeah, when you pull it out, you're going to hear this lovely crackling probably, and the sound of bread crackling. You're going to need to leave it sit for, a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes. And then when you slice into it, it's still going to be, you're cooking it at really hot temperatures. And so, as long as you can handle it and touch it, you'll be able to cut it. But, you'll find the inside is going to be ultra moist and wet when you go to slice it when it's still hot.
Yeah.
But I say, if you're like our house, you'll be diving into that bread, before you know it. And what I find, if your bread turns out reasonably well at all, a couple of people can sit down and eat a loaf of bread like that.
Yeah. And it does cool faster, obviously, outside of the Dutch oven. So when it comes out, we have a very long spatula. And so it's easy to kind of tuck it under and pull it out. And then, with a hot pad or a glove, it's easier to lift it out and let it cool on a cookie sheet or, on your stovetop or something like that.
Yeah, well, usually, we've got some of these beautiful wooden bowls like this that we like to let our bread cool in. But I'm hoping all your bread turns out great. I had one other thing I was just going to mention really quick, and I forget what it is. Oh, the nutritionally. I'll just say this: you do some reading on the nutrition of sourdough. It's fascinating stuff. The bacteria, for example, that is working with the wild yeast is lactobacillus. And so what ends up happening is the sourdough culture is loaded with all kinds of probiotics and prebiotics and vitamins and minerals. It's got a host of nutrition. A lot of the starches that people think are bad in bread have been removed because the bacteria has digested them. And so it's super, super nutrition. People who worry about weight gain from bread, you don't have to worry about that. Since we've been eating bread, I've lost like 40 pounds, and we eat bread almost every single meal. Literally, so all of the things you think about, the negatives of typical traditional bread, the store-bought bread, does not apply to sourdough. So you can bake as much of this as you want in one time. Take a day, just bake a bunch of it. It freezes beautifully. You can store it in the freezer for really long periods of time. So if you do a day of baking, you can end up with a lot of bread.
Yep.
Yeah, Joan.
Question?
Yeah.
I'm not using the Dutch oven, so I do 20 minutes and then turn the oven down for 30 more minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Exactly. And I don't know if you guys' bread is all in the oven yet or not, but we're coming up on 3 minutes and our 20 minutes is over, and it's smelling just amazing in here.
Yeah.
I wish I could just blow it through.
Yeah. Yeah. Just plan on bake time. The total bake time is going to be about an hour. And like I said, it depends on your oven. Some ovens run hotter, some run cooler. Ours tends to run cooler, so ours is going to be, on the long side of baking. So,
do you ever use a thermometer to test?
Just the oven.
The oven temperature is what we rely on. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah. Are we going to get a handout or something with all the kind of measurements of things we added in? We started taking notes kind of halfway through.
Okay. Well, we'll put something on our website for you. We'll do a summary of the class. And also, we forgot to mention early on, I hope nobody minds, we are recording this and we are going to post the video for people who couldn't make it. We were really just overwhelmed. A lot of the people who registered didn't show up, which is probably a good thing. I think it was a perfect number of people, but there's a huge interest in sourdough, in part because of the coronavirus pandemic we're seeing. And the reason there's a connection there is important. And do some more reading and research on sourdough. It really is an important skill for humans to have as a species. it's a good thing for us to know how to do, to take these 3 simple ingredients and make super nutritious, low energy, easy to produce. It doesn't take much energy to produce it. Food. You can do this literally on a campfire. There are people who do campfire sourdough bread. And so it's a really important skill to have, and it's delicious at the same time, delicious and nutritious. So Joan?
Could you briefly just talk about how the results vary when you use different kinds of flour, like all-purpose versus bread flour versus more whole wheat flour?
Sure.
Yeah.
And it varies so much from mill to mill, because all the mills do their milling differently too. And you know, the type of wheat they use, some mills will put barley in their bread flour to make it softer, because they assume that you might be adding yeast to your bread, and they don't know that you want gluten. The shortest answer I can tell you is for sourdough bread, you're wanting a high protein flour, because it's the protein that forms the gluten. So there's glutamine is one of the proteins in the bread that binds with 2 other proteins, and that combination of those proteins is what forms the gluten. And so the higher the protein content in the bread, the more gluten you're going to have, and the more structure you're going to have, the bigger the rise you're going to get, and all that other stuff. So that's what we look for in a bread, is a nice high protein. Some mills will call it a high gluten bread. It's not really true, because again, it's protein that's in the flour, it's gluten that forms after you add the water and stuff to it. But so look for high protein or high gluten organic wheat flour. You can actually do sourdough with rye flour, with all kinds of other flours too. You just have to make sure that whatever flour you're going to use, that's the basis of the starter that you start with. So if you're going to want to do rye flour baking, you want to bake rye sourdough, you have to have a rye starter, because you'll harvest different bacteria and different yeast that will be eating the rye flour. And so for whatever kind of flour you want to use, just make sure you've got a starter for it that's robust and growing, and you can vary it. You can add nuts to the dough. You can sprinkle nuts on the top of the bread before baking it. The options are literally endless, and the flavor opportunities are just all over the board.
I have a question.
Okay.
I can only buy all-purpose flour where I live.
Okay.
No choices, no labeling, high protein, doesn't say anything, just all-purpose flour.
Can you buy it via the internet and have it shipped? That's what we do.
Well, I live in Costa Rica.
Oh.
Okay.
So, but I do know a place that sells gluten, but is adding gluten to regular all-purpose flour achieving the same thing, or is it not the same thing?
It's probably not the same thing. And I wouldn't be too worried about all-purpose flour.
We've used it.
For years, actually, we kind of focused almost entirely on all-purpose flour. You won't have as much gluten, you won't have as much of that rubbery texture in the dough. It will still rise up, it'll still taste lovely, and you'll still have really good bread.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
You know, some of these people get, sourdough can be a little bit like a religion, and people get really fanatical about this one component or that component. The fact of the matter is it all works, and you can come up with your own variations with the own flours that are available to you, and you're going to end up with better bread that you can buy in the store no matter what you do.
Yeah, we've traveled around different parts of the country, and what's available in different areas of the country even varies. And we've had success on all of them. I mean, you sometimes encounter really strange results, or strange aspects, like the desert of New Mexico was the strangest, for us. It took the starter forever to even get any kind of activity. We weren't sure whether we would even be able to get a culture going, but all of a sudden, I would say a few days longer than it takes here, then it started to, generate bubbles and generate life. It's just, wherever you are and the environment that you're in affects so much of what's out there and, how it's going to behave.
Because you're literally harvesting the wild yeast. It's funny. I love this aspect of sourdough even. In fact, people have talked about, San Francisco sourdough and how special it is. And they go out and they get San Francisco sourdough starter from San Francisco, and then they bring it back to wherever they live, and it ends up not being the same. Well, it's because they've moved the starter, and eventually over time, the local yeast from your own environment takes over, and you have your own local sourdough starter no matter what.
Yeah.
So it really is all about where you live and what yeast and bacteria are living in your house.
Yeah, I think it gets better with age too. Our starter is several years old now, and it's been from coast to coast, so it's been all over the place. And so it's a very active, very robust culture. So we're pleased, and that'll come with time.
All right, yeah, Sarah.
I just want to clarify with the different flours question.
Yeah.
So if I want to do a sourdough loaf that has pure rye, I would need to start with a rye starter, for example, or kamut or whatever.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to just throw a bit of rye into my all-purpose wheat flour, that's okay.
Yeah, you'll end up with some really spotty results because depending upon how you mix it, some people will do like a marbled rye, and then you could end up with some really dense parts that didn't rise, or because it's mixed throughout, you'll end up with probably not as much overall rise. If you want rye, I would just make a rye starter and keep it around.
So then, on the whole, sourdough breads do best with a single flour as opposed to a blend.
You can use a blend, just use the blend for making your starter. And then you'll have a blend of the bacteria that wants to eat the barley or the rye and the wheat, and it'll all be together in one starter.
We could literally make a starter with 3 different flours.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
With the starter, I feel like my problem has been I don't use it often enough to keep it really active. So what are your thoughts on if you only want to bake every couple weeks, what do you think the best way to do that is?
The best way to do that is to get your starter. Let's pretend like you've got starter in the fridge and you're gonna bake. 2 days before you bake, you're gonna get your starter out and start feeding it, because you want to get 3 to 4 good feedings in that tired starter that's in the fridge, so that it's really active before you bake with it. When you're done baking, feed it really good. Give it a lot of extra flour and water, and then just put it in the refrigerator. You want to take it out and feed it like once a week. You don't have to do more than that. Just feed it once a week. And then when you're going to bake with it, get it out a few days before, and then you'll be good. So long as like every Saturday, feed your starter and then store it in the refrigerator, you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. You hear these people who say that they're just like a slave to their starter so that they gave it up. Well, you don't have to be a slave to your starter. Keep it in your refrigerator. You can also preserve your starter by drying it or freezing it. It's amazing how much of the bacteria will live once it's frozen. And you can keep it for up to a year in the freezer. When you thaw it out, it will not be as active, and it will take you an extra few days to get it up and going again, but it will be your starter with your bacteria, and it will come back remarkably fast. The way they used to preserve it in the olden days was to take a sheet of wax paper, take the starter, spread it all over the wax paper until it all dried, and then break it off. So you've got this dried starter, and yeast and bacteria will preserve in that dry state for up to 2 or 3 months. And then you just add water to reconstitute it, stir it up, and start your starter all over again that way.
Mm-hmm. And if you do, let your starter go, you can always create a new starter, but then you're starting from square one. So feeding your starter and keeping it preserved just enables you to bypass all of that prep time and all those prep days.
And it really does get better with age. So the older your starter, I mean, there's a reason, people boast about the age of their starter because it gets more potent, you get better rise, you get better flavor, more complexity in the flavors the older it gets. So, just think of it as a new family member.
And that lives in your refrigerator.
And only has to be fed once a week.
What kind, I got starter from you. What kind of flour did you use?
We are using the stuff that we have now. It's the Great River, it's all 100% wheat. It's bread flour, and it is organic lily white bread flour.
The brand doesn't have to exactly match. You're trying to match the flour.
Grain,
So even if you got a different brand, as long as you've had that bread flour. And we have mixed all-purpose organic wheat with organic bread flour. Sometimes we do a mix of those, and that still seems to work out okay.
As long as you're staying with wheat starter and wheat bread. You don't want to go wheat to rye or, wheat to barley. There's all kinds of grain flours out there, and you can really make sourdough with most of them, so long as you've got a starter that is that grain, because it's the bacteria and yeast that want to eat that grain that you're growing in that jar of gunk. And so.
Jar of gunk.
So any last questions before we sign off and come back? Literally like 4:10, we'll be showing off our breads. Is anybody's house not smelling wonderful right now?
Our loaf kind of like got really tall and a little misshapen. Does that mean you didn't pour deep enough to let the air out? You just kind of blew up and they're sort of like.
I'm only getting about every other word.
Yeah, I'm not understanding the comment. It's the audio is breaking up.
Okay, let me try that again.
Oh, that's much better.
Okay. Our loaves got kind of misshapen in the oven. They kind of got super tall and sort of weird. Does that mean we didn't score deeply enough to let the air out? Is it just kind of blowing up?
It could be, or it could have been something to do with the original shaping. If even the expert bakers are honest with you, they will admit that they oftentimes get these weird shaped loaves because if the dough is not perfectly consistent in its texture inside, one area grows bigger or faster than the other area, that kind of stuff can happen. And it happens to all bakers. So
the Dutch oven, that's where one of the advantages of the Dutch oven helps you because it will
contain the shape
better than a flat surface. But nothing is a guarantee, that might happen.
Okay.
All right.
And then I also just had one question about keeping the starter and feeding it. I've tried a few times in the past years and have ended up failing, mostly because of how messy the starter is.
Yes,
like when I discard it, it almost becomes like cement, if I don't wash things right away. And I was just wondering if you found any good way to clean up, or do you worry about it going down your drain when you're washing your utensils and like getting like cement in there?
I use 2 spoons and I try to get as much off of each spoon so that there's the least amount on the utensils that I can get.
Okay.
Then with the drain, I'll take a paper towel, wipe off those to get as much of that off, and then I'll have the utensils pretty much clean. With the starter, sometimes if you just kind of feed it and let it go for a few hours, when you get back to it, the lid on the jar might pop up and it might kind of ooze out over the sides of the jars and stuff. So the jars can get messy as well. You know, like you can see a little bit on this one. And as long as it dries, then it's easy to peel it off, and then I just throw that out.
And this is sort of the setup we use when our starter is out feeding. Right now, what's in this is flour in the bowl, but we'll use that bowl to store our discarded starter. So all we have to do is lift this plate off, put our discarded starter in the bowl, stir it up, maybe feed that a little bit, put this back on, and then feed the starters. That way, when we have those really excited starters that kind of bubble out and ooze onto the counter, they're oozing onto the plate, not the counter.
Yeah.
And any mess that you make is being made on the plate, and you can just easily move this entire thing to anywhere on the counter that you want it. And that becomes a really, you can set your forks or spoons that you're stirring with also on here. It becomes sort of a self-contained little starter management kit.
Yeah, but I try to I try to minimize the amount of starter that goes down the drain. I have the same sort of concern that you raised, and it's just try to wipe off, and then once it dries, it just, you know, flakes off, and then it's just easy to throw out.
Okay, thank you.
And I've never heard of it actually being a problem, because as soon as you get that dry stuff wet, it turns to mush and gets really wet and slippery and gushy right away. So even, you know, take the old, you know, like when they dry starter, you take those old chunks of starter, pull some off of your jar or whatever, and stick them in water. They turn to wet and they dissolve in water very quickly. So I don't think the issue with the drain is probably that big of a problem.
It may not be, but I try to minimize that as much as possible, because like you said, it feels like cement.
All right. Any other questions? Then we'll go offline. We'll check back at about 4:10, 4:15. We'll be back. Yeah. Thanks you all. And I can't wait to see your bread.
Me too.